How are you guys doing? Today is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Mike Thomas, the starting wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, who today turns 28 years old. And with this episode, I think my intention with this is to let his numbers and his accolades and what he's been able to accomplish throughout his career speak for himself as to why I think he is an elite NFL player going into the 2021 NFL season, definitely for this calendar year, and how I think he's going to continue to be a player that will be on this list for years to come, and how one day he most definitely could be a guy that's wearing a golden jacket at the end of this. So, if you've never heard of Mike Thomas, he stands at about 6'3", 212 pounds. He's very strong. He's very muscular. He runs routes incredibly well. He has very strong hands, so it's hard for him to drop it. And he has the most accurate quarterback in NFL history that throws the ball to him all the time. So, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. And since I'm a Falcons fan, I watch this man all the time, and I'm telling you, this man is a problem. So, to give a little bit of background, he's originally from the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. He went to William Howard Taft High School, which was right down the school from where I went to middle school, or right down the street from where I went to middle school, so I know exactly where that is. And while there, he established himself as a good enough prospect to be taken as a 4-star recruit at Ohio State. And this is when Urban Meyer, this is when it was really kind of at its peak. And the first year that he would play there would be Urban Meyer's first season. Once he got to Ohio State in 2012, his rookie season, or his freshman season, he would play 11 games. He ended up with 3 receptions for 22 yards the whole season. And then his sophomore year, he would end up being redshirted. And of course, in those seasons, in Urban Meyer's first couple seasons, they would be ineligible for a bowl game because they were suspended for something, I forget exactly what. And then their second year, they would end up losing in the Orange Bowl to Clemson. But the very next year, during the first season of the first season of the NFL or the college football playoff, Mike Thomas would end up playing 15 games for Ohio State, and this would be a season where they ended up going 14-1 and qualifying for a spot in the college football playoff. During the season, Michael Thomas would end up with 54 receptions. He led the team with 799 yards. He also had 9 touchdowns on the season, establishing himself as one of the better wide receivers on Ohio State's roster, and they would end up winning the national championship in 2015 this year. First, they beat Alabama in the college football semifinal, and they ended up beating Oregon when they had Marcus Mariota, I believe, and this is the first college football playoff win, I believe, in history. And this would be yet another championship for Urban Meyer, by the way. But following the season, Mike Thomas would come back for his senior year. His senior year, he played 2 less games. He played 13 games on the season. In a season where Ohio State would finish with a 12-1 record, and they would end up beating Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, as they were one of the teams that were just outside of the college football playoff looking in. But that season, Mike Thomas would finish with 56 receptions. He led the teams in receptions, as he had 2 more than he did the previous year. He had 18 less yards than he did the previous years. He had 781, averaging more yards per game. And he would end up with 9 touchdowns, just as many as he did the year before. And following that season, he established himself as a good enough prospect to be taken with the 47th overall pick in the 2016 NFL Draft. He's taken in the second round by the New Orleans Saints, and the very team that he currently plays for now. He hasn't been moved, and he's really kind of set a place for himself in New Orleans. So, going into his rookie season and going into his age 23 season, he would start 12 of the 15 games he would play in a season where the New Orleans Saints would finish with a 7-9 record, the only time that the Saints would not make the playoffs ever since Michael Thomas had been drafted by the team. In that season, he would finish with 92 receptions in his rookie season for 1,137 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season. Of course, he wasn't really a returner or a running back, so he really didn't do much else. But of course, in that season, he would go on to make the all-rookie team And I mean, the fact that he had 92 receptions in his first year is kind of insane, and he still had 1,000 yards. And that season, I think following his rookie season, the NFL knew that he was going to be a problem, a nuisance, and this would translate into his second year with the team. In 2017, his age 24 season, he would start 14 of the 16 games in a season where the New Orleans Saints would end up with an 11-5 record on the season, finishing with the best record in the NFC South for the first of the most recent 4 years that they've did it. And this is when Alvin Kamara was the offensive rookie of the year, and Marshawn Lattimore was the defensive rookie of the year. So the Saints were definitely a very built team all the way through. In his second year in the league, Mike Thomas would make the Pro Bowl as he finished with 104 receptions on the season, the first time he eclipsed 100 receptions. He finished with 1,245 yards, which is a little over 100 more than he did the previous season. He finished with 5 receiving touchdowns, the least amount of receiving touchdowns he's ever put up in a full season that he's played. And then once they made the playoffs, the New Orleans Saints would end up beating the Panthers in the wild card, and they ended up losing to the Vikings on... This is the first time that they lost on the last play under Sean Payton. But of course, with how good the Saints were, they would come back for yet another season. And once he made it to, I guess this leads into his 2018 season, his age 25 season, where he would start all 16 games for a New Orleans Saints team that would finish with a 13-3 record, the best record that they've had since he's gotten there. And once in this season, he would end up leading the NFL in receptions for the first time in his career, as he had 125 of them. He had 1,405 yards, the first time he'd ever eclipsed that number, finishing with 9 touchdowns for the second time in his career. And he would go on to make the Pro Bowl for the second time in his third year in the NFL. And he would go on to be a first-team All-Pro NFL wide receiver in his third year in the pros, which should kind of speak out to how amazing this player has been. And then going into how they fared in the playoffs, they would end up beating the Eagles in the divisional round right after the Eagles had won the Super Bowl. And then they would end up losing in the NFC Championship to the Rams in overtime. I think this is when there was a missed pass interference call. I don't remember what it was, but the Saints have had a good amount of playoff woes since he's gotten there, but this is the deepest that he would make it in the playoffs ever since he's been on the team. And following that, he would follow that season up with probably one of the greatest seasons that a wide receiver has ever put up. And despite the fact that he was playing with Drew Brees, I mean, he still had to catch the balls that were thrown his way. So going into 2019, his age 26 season, he would end up starting 15 of the 16 games in a season where the New Orleans Saints would finish with a 13-3 record for the second year in a row. He would finish with 149 receptions. Not only is that his personal high, and not only did he lead the NFL in receptions, he broke the NFL record for most receptions in a season with 149 of them, which is insane. That's never been done, and he destroyed the record. He would end up with 1,725 yards. That is the first and only time thus far he has ever led the NFL in receiving yards. He finished with 9 receiving touchdowns for the third time in his career. He led the league in yards per game. He averaged 107.8 yards per game that season, in a season that goes along. So I think out of active wide receivers, only Julio Jones and Antonio Brown have had more receiving yards in a season. And after being named to a Pro Bowl for the third time in his 4-year career at that point, he was also named to the first team All-NFL. And once the Saints made the playoffs, they would end up losing their very first game in the playoffs to the Vikings. And Michael Thomas was actually named the Offensive Player of the Year in 2019 for breaking the NFL receptions record. I mean, the fact that a wide receiver won the Offensive Player of the Year is insane. It rarely happens. So, of course, like a tip of the hat to him from a football fan to a football player. And then this would translate into this most recent season, which was plagued with injury, I will admit. And I think it was in the first game he left with a high ankle sprain. He came back in like week 9, and he had like 100 receiving yard game of the season. He was put on injury reserve in December, and then he eventually came back for the wild card game against the Chicago Bears. But in the season, he would start 5 of the 7 games, and this would be a season where in this most recent season, the New Orleans Saints would finish with a 12-4 record, despite Mike Thomas not really being in the lineup. But he would finish with 40 receptions for 438 yards. He had no receiving touchdowns at all. His only receiving touchdown came in the playoffs. And with this, the New Orleans Saints would go on to beat the Bears in the wild card. Of course, Mike Thomas had 73 yards and he had a receiving touchdown. And they would go on to lose in the divisional round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This would be the game where they went into the fourth quarter completely tied. The Buccaneers would come out of this game victorious, and they would go on to win the most recent Super Bowl. But that's the context as to how it fit into Mike Thomas's career. And if we're looking at Mike Thomas right now, he's now turning 28. He's about to enter his 6th season in the NFL. And so far, he's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He's been named to the first team All-Pro the last 2 full seasons he's played in the NFL. And I think that he hasn't really missed a step. I think that once he comes back from injury, whether Drew Brees is there or not, he's still going to be a problem in the NFC South that a lot of people are going to look out for. And with that said, I don't even think his career is even close to being done. I think he still has a lot of Pro Bowls left in him. But with that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 11 and a half minutes of this piece. I hope all is well. And if you ever get a chance, watch my boy Mike Thomas. He's currently wearing number 13 for the New Orleans Saints. He's one of the best wide receivers I've ever seen in my life. And I think going forward, for the 2021 season, he's definitely a player to keep your eye on this season. After all, he still is the NFL record holder for most single season receptions, and I think it'll be a while before that record gets passed. It could happen like immediately, but this is a very impressive record. I imagine it'll be very hard to break, and I think this is one of the ways he's immortalized himself in the NFL. And with that said, once again, I want to thank everyone for listening to this piece. Once again, today is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. I want to wish Michael Thomas a happy 28th birthday. And I will get back to you tomorrow once all the exhibitions are finished, as my next elite profiles will come on the 6th as I cover Timo Werner, the elite now 24-year-old striker who represents Chelsea and Germany. Thanks once again for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.